Right there.
All right, just click on that.
Uh-huh.
All right, now, let me show you. Just hit edit.
Haven't heard.
That's how it works.
I haven't heard that.
I'm
I'm scared.
Nervous.
She texted me.
Let me see. Share contact, click on that.
I'm not gonna ask. I was just kidding. I said, no, you are.
Message your mail.
And thank goodness,
Yep.
you can't.
No, exactly. Meeting of the North Carolina Board of Pharmacy into order. I want to welcome everyone here today. We have a clipboard that we're passing around. If you'll please sign that up so we know who is in attendance today. At this time, I'll read the ethics statements as required by our governor. In accordance with the State Governor's Ethics Act, it is the duty of every board member to avoid conflicts of interest and appearance of conflict. Does any board member have any known conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before the board today? If so, please identify the conflict or appearance of conflict and refrain from any participation in a particular matter involved. Hearing none, Mr. Campbell, we will proceed. If you'll start the meeting, please.
First, those in the audience will notice that the composition at the front table is different. If you come to these meetings, and I know we are delighted, staff are delighted, I don't know about the other board members, but staff are delighted to have you back, so you have to take that up with them. So,
Well, I'm glad to be back, looking forward to it, and I just told Carol, she said, glad to have you, and I said, you may not be time the afternoon's over.
you're going to get this ship straightened out before the end of the day, right?
I don't know, but it's good to be here, I'm looking forward to it. I don't know anything I've enjoyed in my professional career more than giving back to the profession, and this is one of the major pieces of that, and I look forward to serving the pharmacists of the state.
Information network.
Criminal Justice Information Network. And so Robert joins us as Governor McCrory's appointee as the public member of the board and for a 5-year term. And Robert, glad to have you again and glad to have you sitting up on the Diaz officially.
Thank you. Good to be here and look forward to working with the board members and the staff and to support the pharmacists down in the state, as Stan said, to build relationships and try to improve their relationship with the board, and good to be here.
Thank you, Robert. And Robert, for those who know, will also be joining us at the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy annual meeting, so the drinking from the fire hose will continue over the weekend. We look forward to that.
Mr. Campbell.
Hey, y'all may have made a mistake now. You might should have separated us.
Now,
When you get Randolph County too heavy on one end of the table, it's rough.
I'll leave that at the discretion of the president who's presiding as to whether you need to
Mr. Haywood, the reason I got him close because his background is law enforcement. That's why I put him next to you
There you
to keep you in control.
Probably wisdom, Joey.
Mr. Campbell?
Mr. Campbell, I would stipulate for the reason that we do understand that it is heavier on the right-hand side.
Wherever I am, it'll be heavy.
Oh, it's like you never left, Stan. With the abuse picks up right where it left
That's
off.
right. It's one and the same.
Yeah, you got it picked up.
Mr. President, before we move further into the regular agenda, it is, of course, the time of year in which the board selects its officers. And I will yield the floor to you guys to go about that process as you see fit.
Do I have a motion from the board members for a nomination for president?
I'll nominate Bill Mixon for president.
Okay. Are there any other nominations? All right, Mr. Campbell, what do you need from there?
You would need to go ahead, if Bill is running unopposed, he'll have to make his campaign speech now and be vetted. Now, that you could certainly move by acclamation to accept Mr. Mixon as the president of the Board of Pharmacy.
Okay, well, Mr. Mixon, I'm assuming you will accept that position?
Accept.
We'll move by acclamation then that Bill Mixon will be our president for the upcoming year. And for vice president, do we have a nomination?
Carol Day, Tation to president of the,
You're more than
Board of
welcome.
Pharmacy.
You'll get the key to the executive washroom immediately after the meeting, so, as will you, Carol, so.
very good. All right. Next.
Next item on the agenda, Mr. Mixon, is we have a public hearing on a proposed rule amendment to 21 NCAC 46.3301. If it's a pleasure to the board, I'll go ahead and give the background on that. I'll summarize the public comment that we have received and invite anyone who is here that wishes to comment on the rule to do so. As the board members know, Board Rule 3301 regulates the registration of pharmacy technicians. There are two principal amendments that have been proposed to the technician registration rule. The first is to make clear that pharmacy technicians who provide services solely at a free clinic, as that is defined in the Pharmacy Practice Act, are required to register with the board and complete the program of training described in the statute, as is the case for any pharmacist, but would be exempt from paying the pharmacy technician registration fee. The prior version of the rule specified that volunteer pharmacy technicians were not required to register with the board, and recall that the backdrop on this is there was an incident arose in which a pharmacy technician who had surrendered her registration as a result of drug diversion later became a technician at a free clinic and began diverting controlled substances from that clinic. Neither the clinic nor the board had any way to know that she was practicing as a technician there. So this amendment is intended to remove that gap that someone with bad intentions could exploit, but also not to impose a financial burden either on the volunteer technicians themselves or the clinics at which those technicians might practice. The second principal change to Rule 3301 would be the elimination of what is presently enumerated as paragraph C, describing exempting students enrolled in a community college pharmacy technician program from the training requirements described by statute. The reason that is being removed is not to eliminate training requirements for pharmacy technicians, but rather because amendments to the pharmacy technician statute in 2013 have made this a superfluous rule. That issue is already addressed in the statute, and there's no need. Oh, that's true. We could do that.
Mr. Campbell, I move that the comment session be closed.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That would then close the comment period, and the comments are now in the record, and we can go ahead and act on it right now, I think. It's the will of the board. There's no need, I think, to go through a kabuki theater here on any part of this. So the board's options at this point would be, of course, is true for any rule. You could vote to approve the rule as written, in which case it will go over through the Rules Review Commission process, and Clint and I will work with their staff. Or you could vote to not go forward with the rule, or you could vote to go forward with amendments to the amendments, and then we determine whether we needed to republish or not. So those are the options on the table for the board, but the rule is ready for action.
Do I hear a motion?
Motion to accept the rule.
There's a motion to accept the rule. Second?
Second.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
Very good. Well, at this point then, Clint and I will work with the Rules Review Commission to do that, and the board members can debate the matter. So background on this, board members, in April of this year, Mr. Ames did file an application to reciprocate his Alabama license to practice pharmacy. He disclosed truthfully and completely that in 2004 he was arrested for diverting hydrocodone for personal use, charge of property theft. He did pay restitution. He completed a 2-year probationary period, paid a fine, and completed community service. Mr. Ames, as part of his recovery program, did enter into Alabama's CORIP program, which I will stipulate for the record is analogous to our North Carolina Pharmacist Recovery Network program. And he did complete successfully a 5-year period of treatment and monitoring. And we have documentation in here that I'll go through with all of this with the board members. And so Mr. Ames' request today is that the board approve his application to proceed through the remainder of the reciprocity process. So with that, then, I'll ask Ms. Parham to swear you in and how it came to an end, that sort of thing.
Well, I diverted hydrocodone for personal use. I was, just suffering from what I term a self-imposed crisis, driven by just different, forms of fear, personal problems that I was going through at the time. I violated 5 counts of the Alabama Pharmacy Practice Act. I was, I've had values that are up here. My behaviors are up here, but what I was doing was down here. Anyway, I went to work for Walgreens in October of 2003, and in May of 2004, I was I'll just tell you, a pharmacy tech caught me diverting hydrocodone for personal use. At that point, probably maybe a week or 2 later, loss prevention came in.
Enter into treatment with UAB's Addiction Recovery Program. And you see that letter signed by Sandra Frazier, who was the medical director, at least at that time. So I just wanted you guys to see that. It's the document confirming that. I'm sorry to have interrupted, Mr. Ames. And as a result of entering, so if you would then talk about, you entered into the recovery program at UAB. What was that process?
I was inpatient for, I guess, maybe a couple months. After that time, I left there, and I began a program of outpatient where I would go once a week to aftercare, and at that time I had also signed the CORIP contract, and I was calling in. You call in every day, put in your social security number, you phone in, and I was being monitored. I would call in 5 days a week, except Saturday and Sunday.
And if you would, Mr. Ames, describe for the board, I mentioned it to the board, now, describe for the board what the CORIP program
It's
is.
a committee for rehabilitating impaired pharmacists. That's an acronym for it.
And is it the case that the CORIP program is operated under the auspices of the Alabama Board of
Yes,
Pharmacy?
it's now, at that time, the director was Steve Moore, and now it's administered by Dr. William Garver, and it's called the Board of Pharmacy Wellness Program.
But it was the recovering program that was available to you through the Board of Pharmacy at that time in 2004. And you entered into an agreement with that program, is that correct? And what was the duration of that agreement?
It was 5 years.
I want to skip ahead, not you, sorry, Mr. Ames, but the board members. If you look, there's a letter from Dr. Mike Garver behind your tab. That is a letter that Dr. Garver wrote in 2010 to a potential employer of Mr. Ames, describing his involvement with the program. Is it correct, Mr. Ames, that Dr. Garver had written this letter at the time you had completed a 5-year period of
Yes.
monitoring? And you were found at the end of that 5 years to have successfully fulfilled your commitments in that? At the conclusion of that 5-year period, which is, I guess, roughly around 2010, or maybe it was 2009,
Are you with Winn-Dixie?
we know what used to be Winn-Dixie here in North Carolina. They don't exist anymore.
And I was employed as a pharmacy manager for 9 years with them. And then last October, I was first put into the deferred prosecution program. Is that something that you're familiar with?
I would stipulate to describe that is why you enter into an agreement that says if you keep your nose clean after a certain period of time, these charges won't be ultimately brought against you. But they've heard these a time or two before. So.
And then, for some reason, that I wasn't eligible or something for that particular program, and so that was dropped, and then I was rearrested. They came to my house and rearrested me, and so I went back, and this was, I guess, to see if it would go before I would go to trial. And then after probably 15 months or so, it was, I went to court, and it was.
Enter into a plea agreement with you as a
I'm not
misdemeanor.
sure.
It never came up specifically that you could remember. The terms of your plea agreement indicated a 12-month sentence which was suspended for 24 months. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you in fact serve any time
No.
in prison during that 24-month period? And is that because you complied with your term of all the terms of your probation for that 24-month period? And also under that plea agreement, is it correct that you paid restitution to Walgreens? I think you've already testified to that. Is that correct? And is it also correct you were ordered to complete 200 hours of community service? Is that right? And did you in fact complete 200 hours of community service? Or is there any aspect of this criminal charge or any other that remains open or unresolved to this day?
It's just there on my record.
The Alabama Board of Pharmacy then, I think roughly the same time, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong on this, roughly the same time reinstated your license to practice. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was in August.
So once the criminal charges have been resolved, about a month later,
Yeah.
if you would describe to the board members briefly, what were the conditions that were placed on the reinstatement of your license?
That I continued to be monitored through the end of the contract, which was, there was still roughly 3 to 4 years left on that. I attended aftercare once a week for 2 years at UAB, and I also was required to have documented 3 either AA or NA meetings, documented 3 times a week. That was roughly like maybe for the first 2 or 3 years, and then after that they didn't. But I continued to, and I continue to be in the program today.
And is it correct, Mr. Ames, that the term of probation of your license that was imposed as part of that consent agreement in 2005 was a 5-year period of probation? Is that correct?
Yes, it was.
And so as we sit here today, are there any restrictions on your license to practice pharmacy in Alabama?
No, there's not.
What are your plans in North Carolina, Mr. Ames?
Well, I was hired in February with a company called Proxis RX, and they operate outpatient pharmacies located near hospitals. Most of them are in like the professional office buildings, and they serve some retail patients, and they're also there for the hospital employees, and they do provide a discharge program. And let me just say that I was hired in February as a PRN pharmacist. And so I've been working with them, roughly maybe once or twice a week. And I also got my Mississippi license a little over a month ago, and I've been practicing in Meridian, Mississippi, helping them out at that pharmacy. And they also have what they call a discharge program, which they're trying to assist the hospitals in decreasing the readmission rates. And so they offer patients that are discharged an opportunity to get their prescriptions filled, and they counsel them at that time, and then they follow up with them, through I don't know exactly how long, to try to get them to remain adherent to their medications and compliant to their doctor's orders.
So if you're licensed in North Carolina, you have employment available
Yes,
to you immediately.
Their plans are to, they have a contract with a hospital in Wilson, North Carolina, and
We'll stipulate we all know where Wilson is. Yeah, that's right.
I found out where it was. It's a pretty long drive. And they, about a month after I started working for them, they brought me in, and what they're going to do is they're going to change over their pharmacy software to QS1, and they want me to train on that software, and then as pharmacies open up, or they buy pharmacies, they would like me to go in and train the pharmacists that are going to be working on that, and also kind of help start up the pharmacies and help get them operational, get them up and running. I think that's what their intention is for me at Wilson.
I don't have any further questions for Mr.
I did
Ames.
bring some letters. I don't.
And I will absolutely have no objection to your handing those up to the president, and Mr. Pinion will take those from you and hand them up to the board president.
I think these are the right ones here. I think you have the letter from Dr. Garber.
They do. They do. So no further questions from staff. Mr. President, board members, any questions from you guys?
What states are you actively licensed in right now?
Alabama and Mississippi.
Are you currently working now?
Questions from the board?
Are you currently involved in any type of substance abuse program now?
No, I'm not. I'm involved with AA. I have a letter from my sponsor. He's a long-time sponsor and friend now.
Thank you.
If there aren't any more questions from the board, I do want, Mr. Ames, if there's anything that I didn't ask you or the board members didn't ask you or anything you wanted to add, to be sure you had an opportunity. I do appreciate you handing out the letters of recommendation. You're under no obligation, mind you. I just wanted to make sure you had an opportunity.
Well, since I became unemployed in October, that really opened my eyes to the situation I was in. There's a lot of pharmacists out there, and I just found it somewhat difficult, applying to some of the chains, especially with my background. There weren't any doors getting open for me at that time. And so what I did was I kind of just went back to roots. I mean, I started calling independents probably in the first part of January. And, I mean, I called a lot of independents. And it's just been a good experience reconnecting with a lot of my fellow pharmacists.
I have a couple questions, appropriate time.
Go ahead.
Is the discipline that we are talking about today, is that the only time you've ever been disciplined by any board or pharmacy at all?
Yes, I have.
Do you currently have any restrictions on your license in regards to pharmacy manager, precept interns, that type of thing, nothing like that? Do you desire to move to North Carolina?
Well, that was the other thing I was gonna mention. I wanna leave that possibility open. I'm just kind of intrigued with, the Charlotte area. Probably about before, I went through rehabilitation, I was actually looking at a pharmacy in Highlands, North Carolina to purchase. And the owner was in Atlanta, and so I met him in Atlanta, and we came up to Highlands, and, that's a beautiful area. And I think there was only 2 pharmacies in the town at the time. This one had a diner. If anybody's familiar with that, but, that's the other, I guess, maybe connection that I have. It's a beautiful state.
Thank you.
You know,
When did you finish your contract in Alabama for the control set?
It started in 2004, so it would have roughly been 2009.
Nine, okay.
2010.
Okay. Any questions?
Any other questions from the board? Can I have a motion for closed session?
A motion to go into closed session?
Second?
All approved? All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Mr. Ames, we're gonna go into closed session and deliberate what we've heard today, and we'll be back in just a few minutes.
What's that?
Doing
minds here. Is there anything you'd like to tell the students that will be a learning experience for them about your experience?
As far as telling them, just don't let yourself become bigger than, what you're going into the pharmacy profession. Things can get a little, stressful, or you can get overwhelmed or everything, but just don't let yourself become bigger than what your profession is. It's probably the best thing.
Mr. Ames, what I will do after this, I will write up you'll receive from the board, it'll be the order saying that you're eligible to proceed through the process, and you'll continue to work with Missy Betts on that to get authorized to take the MPJE and go through the remainder of the process. But I did mention to Mr. Ames that, let's say in front of the board members, that and it's a lesson for the students too, is how much I appreciate Mr. Ames' complete truthfulness and candor. As the board members know, that's not always the case. Some folks who have had issues in their past don't talk about that fully and candidly, and that's not a good way to go. And Mr. Ames, I do appreciate your candor, your truthfulness, and your cooperation in providing us all the documents we needed. It's a refreshing experience, to be sure. Thank you.
You were charged with a felony but convicted of a misdemeanor. Is that correct?
I think at the time, I had, when they brought me in, they brought me into just a small room and loss prevention. At that time, I broke down. I confessed. I mean, I would have confessed to just about anything. And I don't exactly know what the legal, that part of it, was, if it was the amount that I had maybe said that I had diverted, or which brought that on.
Well, I'm going to ask Mr. Pinion to elaborate again for the folks here, the consequences of a felony conviction.
Yeah, the consequences of felony conviction are really twofold for pharmacists. One, if it's one of a list of enumerated controlled substance felonies, then you can't be employed by a DEA registrant without a waiver. So you'd have to find the rare pharmacy that does not fill controlled substance prescriptions. If you are convicted of one of an enumerated list of other crimes, then you can find yourself on the OIG exclusion list, which means you can't work for a pharmacy that gets reimbursed for Medicare. So it's pretty much a game ender in terms of future employment prospects.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ames. Best of luck to you, and so you'll get something from me probably next week. All right, well, maybe later than next week because I'm traveling, but at any rate, Missy will know that you're clear to proceed on through the process.
Mr. Campbell,
Yep. Sure.
do we retain these letters?
Yes, I will retain those for the file. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ames. Congratulations. Good luck to you.
And while I'll move on to the next item, Mr. President. Emily Sora is here. She's here with Gigi Davidson. They're sitting right here. And most of you remember Emily. She is doing a fellowship or residency with Gigi over at the vet school, and her colleague Carolyn, is it Amish or Amish? Arnish. I didn't say I got Amish in the mile. She's driving a buggy over here, but Carolyn Arnish was here as well, and Carolyn and Emily had some thoughts about veterinary practice and reference requirements. And so Emily, come on up, and Gigi, if you want to come with her or not, or let her spread her wings and fly, that's fine. But of that I have no doubt. And So Emily and Caroline provided me with a memo, which you have behind your tab there, suggesting that the board consider some veterinary reference requirements. So I think I probably surprised Emily a little bit when I called her and said, sure, why don't you come on over and talk to the board about it? So here she is.
Emily, turn the mic to where you can be heard by the folks in the other room. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
We're good. So Emily, I yield the floor to you. Take it away.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you guys allowing me to come here and discuss this. And I guess I'm pretty much here to just answer your questions that you may have, assuming that you've looked over the proposal. I can explain it if that's...
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Okay.
Why don't you give sort of the background and what you're suggesting and why you're suggesting it?
Yeah. So basically, we just see a need for veterinary references in all pharmacies that dispense for non-human patients because pharmacists aren't receiving this type of training in their education. And so they're kind of at a disadvantage when they're filling for these patients, and it has caused errors in the past. A lot of our research, as you can see in the proposal, has pointed to this. But almost 80% of pharmacies in North Carolina do fill for non-human patients, but none of those pharmacies are required to have a resource that allows pharmacists to confidently fill them for these patients. So that's basically why we feel like it's necessary. Yeah.
What resource would you suggest pharmacists have?
So if I were a community pharmacist, I would want a resource that was easy to search and quick to get to, and so an online resource would be my preferred method. There is currently Plum's veterinary drug resource online, and so that would be my recommendation, just because it is online and because they have an institution kind of agreement for multiple users, so it would seem feasible for large chain pharmacies to easily obtain it for their pharmacies as a whole.
I would point out too that and Gigi, you helped us with this. It was 3 or 4 years ago. We do have on the website, Gigi had provided a list of references that if pharmacists thought they needed, this was a good list of references to look at. But Emily is right that the present rule doesn't speak to a requirement for any of those references. You'd certainly hope that people who are dispensing to non-human patients would have a reference, but there is no requirement for it. And Emily has down at the bottom, she has some data, and which you've mentioned, but she has some hard data about the amount of training and the like that is available or not available, as the case may be, with respect to veterinary dispensing.
Emily, did you include any information about medication errors that have been discovered?
Yeah, so in the state of North Carolina, about 20% of veterinarians reported adverse events subsequent to dispensing errors in community pharmacists, but only 3% of pharmacists are aware of these errors. So there's a lack of reporting there too.
What was it 20% from compounded medication or from?
They didn't specify.
Okay.
Mostly from community pharmacies or what we were looking at, so probably just community pharmacies, but
Would you elaborate on the specific example with levothyroxine dosing in dogs
yeah.
versus humans?
Yeah, so levothyroxine in dogs is twice daily dosing and at a much higher dose than we see in humans, and so veterinarians will write for the veterinary-only product Siloxane and not have understanding that community pharmacies for humans don't know what this is and that they don't carry it. And so community pharmacies will see these and assume that the dose is a decimal point off and fill with levothyroxine and assume that they meant once daily. And so dogs are getting underdosed for levothyroxine.
Do you know what the cost is for the online version of Plums?
Yeah, so it's about $85 for a single user. And then if you have more than 5 users, it's $75 per user. And then for an institutional membership, so 25 members plus, they don't state a price. It's kind of like a contact them for.
And a printed copy of Plums, I'll just state for the record, is about $75 for a current copy.
Yes.
Emily, tell me again, what percentage of pharmacies in the state do you think dispense to non-human patients?
So 76.7% of pharmacists reported that they filled prescriptions in their pharmacies.
You did a survey to determine that?
Mm-hmm.
How many respondents did you have in your survey
994
in North Carolina?
in North Carolina.
You get better response on your surveys than I get on my survey, I'll tell you that.
That's about all of them.
That's a nice response rate. Yeah, that's a very nice response rate on a survey.
So you're advocating then that 994, 1,200 pharmacists in North Carolina spend $85 per year for this, is that right?
Correct.
You don't have any stock in that company, do you?
No.
I think where we sit on this, board members, is staff is not asking that you vote today to publish a rule. I think what Emily's here was to present the background, and certainly she's available to answer as many questions as you have. And Emily, I want to thank you. It's very nice to get specific proposal backed up by specific data. That's not the norm. It's very much appreciated. But I think the idea today would be you're not being asked and you don't have to make any decision today, but the question would be, if this is an issue that you think is worth pursuing, then one of your options could be to direct staff to draft up something for your consideration, which you could look at in June and further consider. It's entirely your pleasure. Again, very appreciative that Gigi had already provided information that we have publicized to pharmacists, what the good references are, and we probably are due to update that. I mean, we ought to do that. But it's your pleasure how you'd want to proceed on this. But no decision is being asked today.
It's the will of the board.
I certainly like to
Jay,
take an advisement. I have a lot of interaction. Oh, excuse me, go ahead.
Go ahead, Gene.
As I said, I have a lot of interaction with veterinarians, I guess, because I've raised horses and that type of thing. But, you know, if you Google thyroxine dosing in dogs, you get all the information you need. So I would not advocate a specific resource. I would advocate a resource that's available and used.
Sure.
And I would point out, and that's a very good point, and recall that we used to have rules that were real specific about the resource, which were a mistake.
Yeah.
Because they go out of print or there are other options available. And I think Emily was very careful. Again, Clint and I might want to do the lawyerly thing over the language, but I don't think you're advocating for a specific resource, right?
No.
Just that there be one.
Correct.
That's right.
I mean, the internet's a great resource.
That's right.
You know, one thing you said kind of took me aback just a bit. The pharmacist just took for granted that the decimal place was in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a proper practice of pharmacy in any human or non-human. That's just poor
I would agree with you.
To just assume that it's a decimal error.
Just assume it, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I would tell you that probably if you surveyed every prescriber in North Carolina for human medication, there'd probably be a good percentage of those also that say from time to time they've had issues with pharmacists just not interpreting properly, that type of thing. So that survey, while it's interesting, it certainly can't lead me to make a real firm conclusion about requiring all pharmacists to have a specifically determined veterinary resource book in their store or practice site.
Mr. Campbell, do we know that most chain drugstore practitioners have access to internet references that would include veterinary practice?
I couldn't answer that question. I doubt it, to be candid. That this internet access from places of practice has been sort of a drum beat that I've been banging on for quite some time.
The typical answer that I get when I ask a chain drugstore pharmacist is they have what their corporate office makes available to them, e.g. Lexicomp.
And I do want to state for the record, it will sound like I'm, taking shots at anybody unnecessarily. I will say that my impression is that internet-based resource access today is much, much better than it was even 2 or 3 years ago. I think what you'll find is generally there's not wide open internet access, and I think for reasons we can probably imagine on that, but targeted access to different to different resources. I do think it's a lot better than it used to be, but it's not a free-for-all kind of thing, to be sure.
Emily, that may be a area next year's residents could pursue or explore.
Perfect.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Let me ask one, if I may, before you leave. You say here in the report, 20% of the vets have reported at least one medication error that led to an adverse event for their animal, I guess is the word to say. Of that 20%, how many of them, what was the percentage of compounded prescription versus commercially available prescriptions?
That's not data that we collected specifically. However, I will say that most of the free response comments were from commercially available products.
Well, I guess the reason I asked the question is CBS News has done a hatchet job on compounding pharmacies, whether they deserved it or not, and some do and some don't. And when I see statements like this, I have a flag that goes up and says, you know, we're talking about 20% here. Is that all compounded prescriptions? Is it not all compounded prescriptions? Is it just med errors like they are for human beings, or is it something that was made completely wrong? You know, I just don't like statements like that, and I guess it's exacerbated by CBS News.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm just curious.
Yeah. And if I could just say that, so it's not necessarily 20% of all non-human prescriptions dispensed. It's just 20% of veterinarians that
Have at some point encountered an
Correct.
issue.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, and I'm trying in my mind to clarify, is that 20% reporting a compounded prescription error, or is it a commercially available prescription?
I can't speak at, you know, any sort of scientific basis on that, but impressionistically, what I would tell you is that more of the complaints that we get that involve veterinary, first of all, I do think it's underreported. I think a lot of pet owners, if they've experienced something like that, I think a lot of times they're not sure who they're supposed to go to with that. I think a lot of times they will call the vet board, and we typically don't receive anything from the vet board about that. But when we do get a complaint, most often, Stan, it's exactly the same kind of dispensing error type complaint you would get, and it is far more often than not, it involves a commercially available product that the dose was incorrect, the directions were incorrect, that sort of thing. Sometimes that is explainable as a lack of familiarity with veterinary versus human treatment. Sometimes the explanation is the same as it would be for any other dispensing error. You know,
And you know, I'm sure all that's well intended and mean here, but I just don't want us to lambaste one segment of pharmacy when maybe the blame for these 20% of vets reporting adverse effects shouldn't lie with compounding pharmacists exclusively.
I didn't take it as that, and I don't think it was intended.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get
Yeah.
clarification on.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to know.
It would be.
I'll leave it to Mr. President to recognize or not recognize Gigi Davidson as he.
Feel free, Gigi, and please come up so that you'll be on the mic. And I'd like to know, too, of the 20% of veterinarians, how many actual veterinarians that was?
334, maybe in the 300 range.
I would say to Mr. Haywood's question, the relationship between community pharmacists that are providing only approved products and compounding pharmacists is completely different. There's much more communication between compounding pharmacies and veterinarians, and as Emily mentioned, the products that were mentioned in the unsolicited comments were insulin, levothyroxine, different salts of electrolytes, things that veterinarians use commonly, but the pharmacists assumed that they knew what the veterinarian meant when they wrote for potassium bromide the pharmacists had never seen that, so they assumed that meant potassium chloride and substituted. Emily mentioned the levothyroxine dosing. Insulin is OTC on the human side for the most part. It is not in veterinary medicine. And so pharmacists assume they can counsel on OTC purchase of insulin for pets, which is a very different animal, pun intended, when it comes to treating diabetes in non-human patients. And so I would say with confidence that this 20% is about commercially available products.
Okay, see, that's the kind of information I was looking for, so thank you.
This is why we love Gigi. She is the expert.
Thank you, Jay. And I would also add, if you'll allow me, just one more couple of comments. NABP, as Emily has referenced in her write-up for you, has proposed a resolution 110-514 requesting more veterinary pharmacy education in pharmacy schools.
I know several years ago, we went to Multigon, and one of the presenters presented stuff on veterinary compound and so forth.
I was there. And the other recent development that is not in Emily's report that's breaking now is the American Veterinary Medical Association has also offered a position statement and a resolution on including veterinary pharmacy education in pharmacy schools. The veterinary profession as a whole is very, very concerned that we are the only healthcare professional that is expected to take care of all species, but we're only trained in one. And so that's a very vulnerable and unfair position to put us in without having the
Do you have
tools.
an understanding as to why so few students chose to take the veterinary elective?
We only had, this was the first year of it in North Carolina,
Okay.
and Emily and I and Carolyn taught it. And the electives are pretty competitive on Thursdays and Tuesdays. And so we were up against pediatrics and hem-onc and some of the real favorites. But I will say that all 10 of the students who took our elective this year have now petitioned UNC to do a rotation with us, an API rotation with us, and we've squeezed them in. So we will accommodate them any way we can. And I'll also add that since 1989, we've precepted over 500 pharmacy students in API rotations at NC State College of Veterinary Medicine. So we're trying.
Good.
We're really trying.
And I'm going to tell you right now how many students have ever reported anything other than having loved that rotation, and the answer is 0. Because I get a lot of them. They wind up, for some reason, a lot of them wind up doing your rotation and coming over and doing a board rotation about the time. And it's a very, very high, highly regarded rotation, not only here, but Gigi takes students from all over. I don't know how she does it. Maybe she doesn't sleep.
I have good help.
It is encouraging to me that 11% of your respondents did state that they had veterinary drug resource.
Yeah.
So I think the people that need it have it and have multiple copies.
And as Mr. Minton pointed out, there are plenty, of good veterinary references out there. We didn't mean to indicate that one was the one that everybody should have, just so they have something.
Would you agree that reliable information is available just through a Google search?
Boy, that puts you on the spot, doesn't it?
I would say if you have the appropriate filter to use that information, your training,
Yes.
then you can use the internet, but just as with all things, some of the stuff you find on the internet is dangerous.
Okay.
The signal to noise ratio can be a little low.
So, Mr. Campbell, we have a request for rulemaking.
Well, yeah, I think the request is, and Emily, certainly correct me if I misstate this, and the request is Emily wanted to present this as an idea for the board, and I think what's on the table for you guys is, what do you want to do going forward? You certainly could tell me and Clint, take Emily's memo and her suggestions and the background data, draft up something that you could consider. Or say we want to take it under advisement and we'll discuss it more. But whatever you want to do at this point, and Clint and I are happy to, whatever your pleasure is, we will go ahead and execute it.
Let me in, Gigi, thank y'all for being here today. I think that the board's position at the present time should maybe to heighten the pharmacist's awareness of the things we talked about today, that a lot of drugs are different. We all know that for animals and for different animals, actually, as far as that goes. And And just if we could heighten the awareness of don't take anything for granted, which I thought we already did.
And I'm delighted, because I've done this with Gigi before. I'm happy to make myself and our resources available anytime to publicize that. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be both. That's whatever y'all want to do. But Gigi knows if she calls me and says there's something she wants to get out to the pharmacist, I'll get it out. So.
Well, I don't want to study this to death, but at the same time, I think if you come back to the board with a proposed change in some language, that may spur some corporate change to make a change in their availability. Do we have anybody in the audience from CVS or Walgreens or Rite Aid that can speak to what's available? No, we don't.
I work at Harris Teeter, and as far as I know, we have nothing. We mostly get fluoxetine and insulin, so we just kind of deal with it.
And who is we?
Harris Teeter.
Thank you.
I'm happy if it's a pleasure of the board to just draft something up for you to have to look at. It doesn't mean you have to do anything with it, but if it's your pleasure, I'm more than happy to have something you can look at. It doesn't trigger any sort of legal requirement to
Why don't you do that,
anything.
please?
And
What would you draft?
amendments to 3301 that you guys could look at and decide if you wanted to, I'm sorry, not 3301, to 1601 that you guys could take a look at and decide if you want to go forward or not. I mean, whatever the pleasure of the board is on that. But as long as Emily and Gigi, would you guys be available to?
Well, this request has merit, and I don't want to just leave it open-ended.
Well, I'm happy to take that direction and provide some. In fact, what I would be happy to do is to get something that you guys can, and I'll attach it to Emily's memo and resend it out sometime in the next couple of weeks, and you guys will have it, and then I'll take your further direction on how you want to proceed on that.
I mean, it's not mandate, it's not going to mandate. I don't
No.
presume this is going to mandate every one of us spend $75 if we don't need to.
No. If something were drafted for you to look at, that's what it is. It's a draft for you to look at. It's like anything else.
Any other discussion on this point? Thank you again.
Emily, thank you very, very much for being interested and engaged and following through with it. It's makes my job easier. And DP, always good to have your expertise and counsel.
Absolutely.
on that.
It's always good to have your support. Thank you.
I do what I can.
Is this an appropriate time for break, or you want to
Absolutely, Mr.
finish the
President.
next
That's
item?
entirely at your discretion. But no, this is a perfectly good time to take a break as far as I'm concerned.
Let's reconvene at 20 after.
Very good.
Well, there you go. What do you think, Rob?
Mr. Campbell, you were ready to continue, please? sir?
I am ready. Do we want to give Stan and Gene a moment, or?
A moment.
We've got, we do have a quorum. We can.
I'll do it. I got him.
Okay. Joey will be playing the part of sort of
His new role.
Yes, sir.
So, Mr. President, the next item on the agenda, the DME Subcommittee, which meets approximately every 6 months, and Mr. McLaughlin is a member of that committee. They have been looking at various of the DME rules, and what you have before you is a recommendation from that DME Subcommittee for an amendment to Rule 2612. Rule 2612 governs, I'm sorry, I'm flipping through too many different pages of stuff here. Rule 2612 authorizes DME providers to maintain separate storage facilities for devices and medical equipment. They have to be within 50 miles of a permitted facility. But the rules prohibits those non-permitted storage sites from dispensing devices and medical equipment directly to patients. And Joey knows this a lot better than I do. I think what comes up a lot of times is large, bulky DME items. I think beds, Joey, is that a good example, and some others that for just practical storage reality reasons are kept at these sites. Moving those out, it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense to go to the storage site, bring it back to the permitted site, and then dispense it out. And so what the DME Subcommittee has recommended is an amendment to the rule that would permit a properly trained, and it's the draft language here, would be an amendment to paragraph B of Rule 2612 that would state, after the storage site can't dispense directly to patients, say an employee of a permitted location who has been trained as required by Rule 2603 may travel from the permitted site to his storage site, retrieve devices or medical equipment from the storage site, and deliver those devices or medical equipment to other patients. I think what the DME committee has in mind is this avoids a practical issue in terms of storage, but also provides assurance that it's not just going to be warehousemen essentially here doing the dispensing, but rather appropriately trained DME employees will be going out and retrieving and delivering. So that is the subcommittee's recommendation, and Joey may have things to add to that or correct any misstatements I've made, but the DME subcommittee has requested that the board publish this proposed amendment for notice and comment.
Yeah, we felt this was a necessary change from the previous rule of the wording, because the way it stood before is you would have to go to the warehouse and then go back to your store, which made no sense at all. And as long as it's a trained employee and they've got their checkoff list of being trained, that would suffice that. So that was a recommendation of the DME subcommittee to have it changed.
I totally agree and motion or move that we put that into place. Whatever rulemaking needs to be done or whatever like that.
Am I correct? This doesn't need a motion?
No, what we would need is a motion from the board to publish the proposed amendments to Rule 2612 for notice and comment.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
I have a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's done.
Very good. And I do want on the record to thank the DME subcommittee, which I think was very thoughtful in this consideration, and appreciate their patience with me throughout that process. If I could then, I want to give, and I know I sent this out by email, but just to give a hopefully brief further legislative update. I think, as everybody knows, the crossover date has come and passed, and what crossover means is that a bill must have been voted upon favorably by either the House or the Senate to proceed further in the legislative session. Now, that's not a hard stop. There are a number of ways in which I've described it that the zombies can come back to life even after crossover date, but substantially winnow down the bills that are going to be further considered by the legislature. And so I want to run down real quickly for you and answer any questions that I can about the bills that we have been looking at. Senate 609, this was the required check of the CSRS and criminal penalties for not doing so. As Mr. Moody advised the board back in April, the sponsor of that bill did not push it, and it did not survive the crossover. H437, this is the home renal products. This has two components to it. One, the direct from manufacturer shipping of dialysate, and then second, specifically provides that patients can request that renal drug products be shipped to where they're receiving their dialysis care, and they can pick up their medications there without the dialysis center getting a pharmacy permit. That did survive crossover. I understand it is teed up, and the Senate Health Committee, and in fact may be considered today. So that bill continues to move apace. Senate 469 was a bill dealing with certain changes for licensing boards with respect to reporting requirements and to whom and to how. That bill did not survive crossover. However, House 760, the Regulatory Reform Act of 2015, not unsurprisingly has survived crossover, and H760 includes a provision directing the Joint Legislative Administrative Procedures Oversight Committee to further study the Program Evaluation Division's recommendations concerning the license and to prepare legislation based on those recommendations for introduction during the short session in 2016. My guess is that this bill is going to pass, or at least this provision of it will pass in substantially the form it's presently in, which means that probably during the fall there will be both APO and potentially subcommittees of that body will be further studying the licensing boards, and we'll certainly need to be prepared to respond to any questions they have and any hearings they have. House 623, this was the bill, you may recall, that would require an out-of-state DME facility to maintain a physical location within North Carolina, 40-mile border zone around the state. That bill did not survive crossover, and I don't have any more about the wheres or whys on that. H195 biosimilars bill we have discussed a couple of times at length. That bill, as we all knew, was voted on favorably by the House. It is now in Senate Health, and I think that it may have in fact been teed up for consideration at Senate Health today. And Dave, I don't know anything different about that. I mean, this was the one that was negotiated among a lot of parties, and as far as I know, it's sailing right along with that.
I think the key component of that one was turn around, I think would is, but the notification process has been totally changed.
Right, that's right. The controversial aspect of the biosimilars bill was a post-dispensing notification requirement, and I think Mr. Minton is correct, is absolutely correct. It was a subject of heavy negotiation, and Dave, you know a lot more about this than I do. Essentially left it such that once you transmit a claim for adjudication, that is deemed to satisfy the notification, and I think the thought is that would radically reduce any impact on practicing pharmacists. H165 and S317, various changes, proposed changes to the controlled substance reporting system, interestingly did not survive crossover. I'm a little bit surprised by that. These were bills that were reintroduced. I think most of what was in there was non-controversial, although I think a lot of what that bill required is already being done without the lash of a statute. It could be that some or all of this reappears in a budget bill. Did they say anything about this, Ellen, yesterday at the meeting you were at? So there we have it. I'm looking for a lot of those things to reappear in the budget bill. The Naturopathic Medicine Practice Act did not survive crossover. It did not come out of committee. Changes to the Naloxone and Good Samaritan Act, that did, of course, survive crossover. Remember, there are sort of two aspects to that. The main aspect of the Good Samaritan Act is there were some further grants of immunity for folks who call EMS or use EMS services in the event of an overdose. They won't be prosecuted for a crime if they are caught in possession of certain drugs. I think that's been that's the main part of that bill, and there's been a lot of negotiation, I understand, on that. The part that affects pharmacy, recall, is just a clarification that pharmacists can dispense naloxone pursuant to standing orders, which, again, the statute explicitly allowed that. I'm not quite sure why the clarification is necessary. And it did also clarify that immunities that attach to prescribers and users of naloxone would also attach to dispensers. A one-off on that, I do know, would report to you that CCNC continues to be very active in looking to make pharmacists a very integral part of the naloxone dispensing chain. And David Henderson, who's the executive director of the medical board, and I met with Theo Pikulis and Jerry McKee. Jerry McKee is back at CCNC. I didn't know that until that meeting, but we met with them. They had questions about standing orders, and essentially what David Henderson and I were both saying was, yeah, you can certainly use them, and that'd be a good thing. But I think they are reaching out to the local health departments to hopefully encourage medical directors of local health departments to issue standing orders for naloxone that all local pharmacies could participate in, so that it would be the standing order on a county-by-county basis that would allow much easier dispensing of naloxone.
So exactly how would that work?
Well, the idea would be that that the medical director at a local, or it could be any physician for that matter, could issue an order and say, any patient, I will be the prescriber for patients that meet certain criteria, and if a person comes into your pharmacy that meets these criteria, you pharmacists are authorized to dispense naloxone to that patient or that caregiver or whomever it might be based on this order, without having to send people out to come back with individual orders. So we'll see how it works in practice. But
So you're thinking the appropriate physician to do that would be the health department?
well,
local
I don't
health
know. I don't
department
know.
doctor.
The question that CCNC posed to David and I is how would folks go about getting it? Of course, David and I said, well, any physician can do a standing order any place. But they're interested in talking to local health departments who, I think their thinking is that if even a few local health departments do these standing orders, they'll become templates that a lot of other physicians or others might be able to use. And so I think that's where they're moving on that. We'll see. So they asked me to make some introductions to some folks at the health department, so I've done that.
I think there's some educational opportunities there. I'm affiliated with 2 different health departments, and there's never been any kind of discussion to that like that, but I'll bring it up.
And I think that's what they're trying to, they're exactly the discussion they're trying to generate. So I made an introduction to, between them to Colleen Bridger, who's the director of the health department in Orange County, who most of you will recall was heavily involved in the health department nurse dispensing of naloxone that we dealt with a couple of years ago. So Colleen's very good at getting the word out and getting people engaged, so hopefully that will work.
Along that same line, may I ask Mr. Moody, is the naloxone shortage, is that pretty much resolved? Nation, do you know?
I think it's pretty much.
I'm
Getting better.
Entity prescribing of epinephrine auto-injectors, again, we discussed that one. It's functionally similar to the schools having epinephrine auto-injectors, except this would apply to this would apply to a facility that would like to have them. That has survived crossover, and I suspect will sail to passage in the Senate as well. Senate 234, the generic code on all prescription drug manufacturer labels. Remember, the information we had was that that bill was not being pushed by the sponsor after learning more about the generic approval process, and it bore out. That bill did not come out of any committee. And then Senate 290, early refills of topical ophthalmics. Interestingly, that bill did not survive crossover. So I did notice after the discussions, y'all recall, say that the board had to make rules about doing early refills. And of course, we already have a rule that says you can do an early refill if it's clinically appropriate, we didn't need it. And it seemed that the driver really was a concern about insurers paying for those early refills. And so the bill got referred to, I think, Senate Insurance Committee, and it never came out of that committee before the crossover. So I don't know whether this shows up in a budget bill or whether they're going to rethink the whole thing.
I think it's interesting to note at that time, not particularly in regards to exactly this, but some of the insurance companies tend to write board rules on a regular basis. You know, they might limit how long a prescription is good, where we all know in North Carolina it's totally different. So that's always been an interesting concept for me. And we've had that discussion before.
We have. That's what I've got on the legislative stuff. Like I say, I'm pretty certain that biosimilars and the renal products bills were up in Senate Health today, and I will send out an update.
Jay, did we initiate any of these rules, or all these just came from legislators?
No, these were all bills that we became aware of, and frankly, Stan, I don't think there's a single one of these that we knew anything about before it got introduced.
Okay.
It's been a lot of scrambling to react on those. So. That's what I got. I will update you guys on renal and biosimilars probably later today once I hear what happens at the committee hearings. Keep you posted. Next item, Mr. President, draft memorandum of understanding among concerning the FDA MOU and the comment period. Recall that comments are due to the FDA by June 19th. And I've not given you anything new. I've more or less shot my bolt here on what I think the issues might be. We do have another board meeting before the comment period is due. I'm seeking some guidance from you guys about what to do. What I would propose to do for you is to take this memorandum that I've written and turn that into a letter talking about the various issues that we've identified that we would like some clarification on from the FDA or some further consideration. Now, I'd be happy to turn that into a letter and provide it to each of you well in advance of the June 16th meeting. And I think what we need to do is decide at the June 16th meeting, what do we want to send, and make a decision then so I could transmit that letter by the filing line. I do think that probably there's going to be, and Carolyn, Bill, and Robert will be there for it. I think there's going to be discussion of this at the NABP meeting, which is another reason I didn't put a letter together. I don't want to repeat something for the sake of repeating it. So I wanted to hear what happens there and then draft if that's what you got. Or I'm happy to do whatever you'd like me to do, but that would be my proposal on that.
Personally, I think that's fine. Any other considerations?
What I would propose to do then, Mr. President, is that as soon as I get back from NABP next week and have whatever, that I will sit down and draft that letter and get that out to you guys by the end of the week, next week. So you'll have plenty of time to consider it and provide me with any feedback that you'd like on that.
So after your meeting at the FDA to discuss this, is there, other than what you've got in your notes, were there any other revelations?
No, I tried to, and my updates are what, obviously we're not a lot of specifics from FDA, but again, my sense was, and Ellen can chime in if her sense was different, was that there was a great deal of receptiveness to the comments. And again, nobody was making any promises about anything, but it was a very thoughtful consideration of what was being said. And again, I think a realization by FDA that there are some things in this MOU that have to be fixed, or states aren't going to enter into the MOU, and they need states to enter into the MOU.
They want states to enter.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Do you agree with that, Ellen? I think FDA recognizes, again, going back, I think FDA understands a couple of things. Number one, they can't possibly be the sole monitoring authority for interstate shipment of compounded products. And I think that there is probably some institutional concern that if they send out an MOU that the vast majority of states just can't enter into because it's unclear or overly burdensome or whatever it is, I think they've got concerns about what the political fallout of that might be. That you're supposed to work cooperatively, but you provided this MOU that states in good faith looked at and said, we cannot enter into that. So I think they're struggling, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say struggling, I think they are motivated to try to come up with an MOU that as many states as possible can enter into.
Am I correct that DQSA mandated an MOU?
Well, what DQSA says is it puts everybody to a choice. Is that each state, that this MOU would come out in a state, if it enters into an MOU, then the interstate shipment of compounded products from that state will be governed by the terms of the MOU. If the state does not enter into the MOU, then the interstate shipment of compounded products will be limited to that 5%, which, if recollection serves, the way the 5% is calculated in the statute is on number of prescriptions. So it would be a simple division. And one of the issues, obviously, everybody's struggling with this draft MOU from the FDA is nobody can really figure out what the units of measure are for the calculation of the 30% threshold, or even if you know what the units of measure are, is this the right calculation? So that's where that leaves it. But I think the FDA understands is that if the majority of states don't enter into this, there's probably not going to be any real practical way to enforce a 5% rule, because the FDA, I don't see how the FDA is going to be able to go around to thousands of pharmacies nationally and do an audit to determine whether it's more than 5%.
Well, if it's unclear at the state level how to do it, then they certainly can't do it.
That's would certainly be a point that I think a lot of folks have raised with them about that.
Did you see any states that were chomping at the bit to sign this thing?
No,
That was gonna be my next question, is like, talking to Kirkland and Arkansas and everything, where are other states?
my sense is that the vast majority of states are right where we are, that all things being equal, we'd rather be partners in this thing. But nobody can, at this point, really understands what the commitment we're entering into or how we're supposed to monitor this, because the equation is written in sand. We can't.
And who has the authority to enter into the MOU?
Yeah, that's another piece of it. One of the things that we have in our memo is a lot of states did say, we're not sure what the state process would be to enter in. If this was an agreement between FDA and a state board of pharmacy, we know how to enter into that. We do that sort of thing all the time. But as it's written, the MOU is an agreement between FDA and the state. Well, I don't think we can enter into an agreement qua the state. Clint and I would have to figure out whether the council of state would have to authorize that, or the AG's office, or who it would be, and raises this other issue about physician compounding, and is it multiple agencies? That's a big issue, and I don't think FDA doesn't care about this. I don't think they thought about that, and but certainly that was made clear. But I think the deadline is June 19th, and then I suspect it will be several months after that before the FDA would even come back with a new draft. A lot of moving parts.
It's been my experience with dealing with FDA on the USP expert committee that although there are pharmacists who work for USP, they don't have anything to, they have very little to say about pharmacy practice. So it's essentially non-pharmacists who are writing all these proposed rules.
I think they are acting, I do think that FDA is acting in good faith. I think, as you pointed, there's a gap in sort of practical understanding that hopefully is being bridged or attempted to be bridged based on these comments, but time will tell on that. But if that's the pleasure of the board, that's what I'll do, is by the end of next week, I will have a draft letter that I will send out to you guys for your
Is that okay,
consideration.
board members? Thank you.
Report on the election. I don't know if Kristen is in here, or I don't think Kristen really needs to come in. On the election, of course, is proceeding. The election closes on Friday. We have built in, let me make sure that I've got this right and that everybody's recollecting the same as I have on the calendar. All right, so let me back up. So the election results will close on Friday. And of course, the tabulation of those results is a matter of Kristen pressing a button, since it's all electronic. We have on the calendar, I have that we have blocked out 1 p.m. Eastern Standard on Monday, May 18th to convene by conference call. Have you got that, Stan? To convene by conference call to certify the election. Remember, we're caught here because our meeting is early. Voting ends after our meeting, but we don't want to wait, particularly if we have to have a runoff. We don't want to wait a month and then certify the election and then have a runoff. So everybody make sure that, I guess Robert and Bill and Carol and I can convene around my cell phone somewhere down in New Orleans and call. We'll almost have a quorum just there, but we'll convene by a conference call to certify the election results, and if there's a need for a runoff, then we'll move directly into that. I have no idea what the voting is, because as in all these elections, I stay blind to that. I don't need to know anything about what the voting is until it's complete.
We'll get a number and a passcode by email sometime this
Yep,
weekend.
we'll give you, what we'll do is give you all the call-in stuff. And then as soon as Kristen and I, well, it'll be Kristen because she's going to be here in the office, I'll be down in New Orleans. As soon as we've got the numbers, we'll send those out as well, so you'll have the report, and then we'll vote on that. Or you can review it, and then we'll certify the election on Monday, if that still works for everybody.
But you'll announce it Friday.
No, I will not announce the results until the board has certified the election. Because if for some reason we announce, I can't imagine what the reason would be, but if for some reason something got off the rails and we weren't able to certify, that wouldn't be good. So we'll announce immediately after certification.
Do we have anybody looking over our shoulder to make sure we do that right, or is it just have anybody looking over our shoulder to make sure that stuff? I mean, I don't think there's.
Kristen runs it. We've never encountered any issue with the accuracy on that. We could. I mean, we could bring in an accounting firm or something, but
I think that'd be too
we've
much.
never-
I just didn't know if anybody ever had a question at all.
No, I've never had a question about it. And like I say, it's certainly we have validated the electronic process and did that several years ago. So I have faith in the numbers that are coming out of that. But
And the statute says that the board is a board of elections for conducting the election, so you are the electoral authority.
on that. And if you wanted to, if sometime down the road you wanted to decide as a body, we want to have somebody else come in and certify all that or the like, we could do that. Be like at the Oscars, we'd have the accounting firm of whomever back there with things in the box. But. All right then, well, I will, but Stan, yeah, we'll make sure you got all that stuff in advance. Financial report, I don't know if, there's Gail, come on up.
Under your financial tab, the first item is the memo to Mr. Campbell with a summary of our April financial activity. Now, if you'll go to the second report, is the balance sheet. And if you'll look at line 6, our total cash is $8.3 million, and line 30, our total assets is $10 million. Under liabilities and fund balance, if you look at line 44, the excess revenue over expenditures so far for this fiscal year is $2 million, and then total liabilities and fund balance is $10 million. The next report is our profit and loss for the 7 months of our fiscal year ending April 30th. And if you'll look at line 25, our total revenues is $3.8 million. Our total budget to date is $3.6 million, and that's a variance of $235,000 over budget. And our annual budget for revenues are $3.9 million. So with that, we are currently about $97,000 under our revenue budget, so we definitely should be over budget on revenues at the end of our fiscal year. The revenues that have the largest variances are, if you look line 6, pharmacy permits, which are over budget by $168,500, and pharmacy renewals are under budget by $9,600. And of course, that was due to the large volume of the Walgreens transfer of ownerships. Also, line 9, DME permits are currently over budget by $21,500. And pharmacist reciprocity fees, line 4, are over budget by $18,000. Now, if you'll look at our expenditures, line 74, our total expenditures is $1.8 million. The year-to-date budget is $2 million, and that's currently a variance of $203,000 under budget. And then our total annual budget for expenditures is $3.4 million. Most of the expenditures are on target with our budget projections, and most of the variances are due to the timing of the invoicing and purchasing versus budgeting. But our largest expenditure variances are line 45, inspection expenses, which are under budget by $24,667, legal fees and under budget by $56,203, and vehicles currently under budget by $40,000. But as I stated, most of these should, line should balance out by the end of our fiscal year. So our total excess over expenditures, line 75, first column is $2 million, which was stated on our balance sheet. Does anyone have any questions?
Thanks, Gail.
Thank you.
While we're here, Mr. President, just related to this, and now would be a good time, we do need to appoint the board's finance committee, because Gail and I and Rhonda, before too much longer, will begin putting together a proposed budget for the next fiscal year. The current members of that committee are Mr. McLaughlin, Mrs. Day, and Dr. Chesson. Obviously, Dr. Chesson can't, and we've had 2-member committees, we've had 3-member committees, whatever your pleasure is. So we do need to have the finance committee reappointed. I will note that Mr. Haywood was on the finance committee for many years, and he well understands the process. So I'm not trying. Well, I guess I am, Stan, trying to poke you over there and see if you don't want. If you're interested in doing that.
Mr. Minton has expressed interest in that. So unless there's disagreement or from the board, then Mr. Minton will be the designee.
Joey and Carol still, and
Plus-
then add Mr. Minton.
Unless Joey or Carol, either one, want to step down.
I would like to continue if you don't mind. I think Ms. Day does too.
as well.
Yep, okay.
Very good.
Very good. We will, Gail and I will be in touch shortly, and we'll go ahead and try to set a date to meet. We usually do that in August. We'll work on getting everything together, get you all the materials well ahead of time, and meet in August to go through that on a line-by-line basis. Related to that, most of you were here yesterday. We're going to probably have some larger ticket items for doing some database improvements per the recommendations from our program review, and so that's going to be sort of big issue, I think, in a positive way. I don't mean that in a negative way. So we'll have that. We also, Mr. President, need to appoint 2 board representatives to the DME subcommittee. The present members of that are Mr. McLaughlin and Mr. Marks was a member of the DME subcommittee until his term expired. So we do need 2 folks who wish to be on that subcommittee.
Volunteers?
Don't let everybody rush.
Since you're involved in DME, Gene, would you kindly serve in that role?
I would be glad to do that if that be the will of the board, yeah.
I don't see a lot of people arguing.
And we do need 2, so Joey, are you going to
Yeah,
continue?
Enjoy.
Yes.
Thank you.
I should ask, if we also designate a board member to the NCPRN board, and Joey's been serving in that capacity. Joey, unless you want to change, I mean, we don't have to make a change on that, or you?
I'll stay.
Okay. We'll have to deal with that. We'll deal with that next year. All right, investigations and inspections, Mr. Kohler.
All right, well, things are humming right along, as usual. We're still on basic track for the number of complaints we've had so far this year. We're knocking on the door of 90. As usual, the procedural legal always lead the way, and then unfortunately diversion is second, followed by errors and omissions, and then inspection follow-ups. So again, we're on track. We'll probably hit probably somewhere close to 300 again this year.
We don't have this information, so just
Yeah, it should be behind.
thank you.
Yep, there it is.
Get what?
Function key 5.
And then the other chart we have here for surrenders, we're up to 20 technicians leading the way with 13, 6 pharmacists and 1 pharmacy. I don't know, one of our investigators out west got yet another one for a pharmacist on Friday for diversion. I don't know if that made it on here or not. Is that on there? Okay, so that made it on here. So we're still at 20. The other thing, pre-hearings went well yesterday. We had 2 of the newer folks give testimony. They did a good job for the first time around. They got some pointers afterwards, but nonetheless, they spoke clearly, presented the information well, but were understandably a bit nervous. Also, we're in the midst of interviews for the 2 open positions we have. We've interviewed a few people already who are good candidates, and we have about 6 more to interview this week, hopefully. And then we have 1 more late next week, so I'm hoping by the end of that day, the 22nd, myself, Ellen, and Crystal can make a decision on both positions and get all these filled and get things started.
So remember that come June 1st, that's when we're implementing the 5-district team approach, and I think I'm right. All the field staff's coming in on the 3rd,
Second and
third
yeah.
for the kickoff of that. But again, our appreciation to you guys for working with us and empowering us to put this
Absolutely.
plan into place.
All right.
Questions for Josh?
Questions, comments, criticisms?
Postulates there.
Postulates there.
Next, just a reminder, NABP is coming up. I think everybody knows this. Robert's going, Carol's going, Bill's going. I think everybody's got my cell phone. I made sure Robert had it, and he does. So I am headed down early Thursday morning, so I'll be there when you guys arrive. Reach out to me. We'll figure out getting together maybe for dinner, at least certainly Saturday night. And I'm looking forward to the meeting for the FDA stuff specifically and some other things. I will say I will be running around even more than I normally do because of the executive committee stuff. So, but I'm available 24/7 by email or text or phone or whatever, however you need to get in touch with me. And per Mr. Haywood's request, and it's certainly a very good one, Leslie and I will put together for each of you dates of the big meetings that are coming up in the next year, District 3, Maltagon, the NABP Interactive Forums, next year's NABP meeting. We'll get that out to each of you so you can, this is stupid. Stan, do you use Outlook, Microsoft Outlook for a calendar? We'll send out an email, but I'll also attach calendar stuff so you can click those open and download them into your calendar. I'll send that out to everybody. The items remaining, we do have our reports to the board. NCAP or PRN wish to do that. Then we have our consent agenda, and then we do have one brief closed session item to discuss, and that's what we've got left. So, Fred, Glenda?
Yeah, I'll do something.
Yeah.
We would be disappointed.
Let you go first. You go. I appreciate the open mic, and I never thought I'd be back here reporting for NCAP again, but here I am, and you're sort of stuck with me. I'm not exactly sure what I should do in this time, but whenever anybody gives me a time to speak, I always take advantage of it. That's the
Nature abhorreth a vacuum, Fred.
the old professor in me kind of thing. But I wanted to sort of mention, you had an update on legislation, and at the Pharmacy Day in the legislature, there was a mention made that there's a bill to encourage Medicaid to pay pharmacists to administer vaccines that we are allowed to administer. And at our provider status committee meeting the other day, it was mentioned that may still be alive. I'm not exactly sure where it is. I guess because there's a funding piece and it didn't have to go through crossover. But I think that would be a real boost for North Carolina pharmacy if we could get Medicaid to reimburse for immunizations that we're allowed to give. And to me, it's sort of like a state-level provider status initiative. I mean, it would just add one more feather in our cap of being recognized as providers. So once we know where that is, and if there's a role we should be playing in sort of promoting that legislation, if we can get it in this session, we'll be letting people know, letting pharmacists know what they might do. Jean's daughter is supposedly updating me on what is the status of that and what we might do. The other thing I wanted to sort of talk about is sort of the rebranding of NCAP and the redirection that we hope we might take advantage of now that we have moved. And I had a conversation with actually a former NCPHA president who asked me some questions about the building and all that. So I thought I would just use this forum as an opportunity to sort of update why we moved and what's behind it. A number of years ago, the NCAP took the building and deeded it over to the NCAP endowment. So they managed the building for us, assumed all the liabilities associated with it, and although we paid them rent, it was a very nominal rent payment that we made. That building was built in 1950. It's becoming more and more expensive. It was becoming more and more expensive to maintain. And on top of that was taxes that were up over $30,000 a year as well. So you sort of had a financial crisis in a sense of trying to keep the building up, and then the nature of downtown Chapel Hill. If you have gone down there recently is a whole lot different than those of you that went to school at Chapel Hill remember it as. And we were being engulfed by some high tower buildings that sort of changed the whole nature of the place. But it implied that perhaps there was some potential revenue or through a sale of a building that our endowment then would have access to that they could use to support the programming activities of NCAP. And so there was a mutual decision made by the NCAP board and the endowment board that this might be a good time to consider selling the building if NCAP could find a new place to go, which then caused us to move out to the Triangle out on Slater Road in a new building that puts us closer to Raleigh and more centrally located, one might say. I don't know if that's true, but I mean, the other factor was that although most, I guess all of you have a degree from Carolina, so pharmacy from your perspective is Chapel Hill and UNC, but in the larger perspective of pharmacy, there's no longer only UNC. We have 3 other schools that are now vying for, and Campbell has graduates all over the state as well now, and so the idea that Chapel Hill is a home of North Carolina pharmacy, I think, is not always appreciated by every other school graduates. And so that, I think, facilitated us being willing to move and looking at our new facility. And we hope that we will be up and fully operational in that facility soon, and we'll be having an open house and would invite all of you to come and participate and see the new home of North Carolina Pharmacy. But that does provide us an opportunity to sort of rebrand ourselves, refocus our energies, and try to redirect the programming. And so we'll be undertaking a major strategic plan this summer to sort of see where North Carolina Pharmacy is and where we as an organization might help move it forward. And would look forward to having the Board of Pharmacy's opinion on terms of issues and concerns and things that we might need to address. And so that's really what I wanted to update you on, let you know that I think as an organization we're alive and well. We continue to struggle with membership, as all organizations do these days. Our 3 staff members plus myself enjoy their new offices. They have made the move both physically as well as emotionally, and are happy in our new environment. And although I don't enjoy the drive out on I-40 as much as I did the drive up Franklin Street to get to work every day, it has worked out. And as I came from the office this morning here and hit the I-40 traffic slow back up, and understand why people aren't as happy to come on I-40. But anyway, that's where we are. I hope you'll be seeing more from us as we re-engage and refocus on trying to advance North Carolina Pharmacy, and I'd be glad to take any questions.
Fred, were many of the legislatures aware that North Carolina Medicaid did not pay for flu shots?
Well, they don't. They do pay for flu shots. They don't pay pharmacists for flu shots.
Right. Yeah. But were any? See, we had record numbers of deaths last year in the flu, and I had scores of Medicaid recipients come and request it, and I'd say you have to pay for it because they won't pay me.
I don't know. I would admit to you that NCAP at the moment does not have a lobbyist and has not really been as engaged in the last, as they should have been in the legislature. And so And I guess, do you have a perspective on it?
It's being proactively worked on right now by at least 2 or 3 different arms. They're aware of that. They're working on that. It's certainly been made aware, and NCAP's has really kind of been involved in that too with the people there involved. But it's certainly a bad situation that I think will be changed.
Yeah, I mean, your question, though, whether the legislators themselves actually knew that
Exactly.
they weren't paying pharmacists to do this. That's the piece I don't know whether they, I didn't have that
I
feedback.
know a handful that did not realize that, so.
And my guess would be most didn't. That was not something that would have been readily apparent to them.
It needs to become apparent.
Well, and that's what we're trying to do, and ACP and retail merchants are working hard to get that message out, and I think it's an important one, and could be a nice both economic benefit, but more importantly, a benefit for patients and their health care is why it's so important.
Before you go, would you give us whet our appetite, so to speak, for the Pharmacy Leaders Forum? Are you prepared to do that?
So coming up in September 25 is the Pharmacy Leaders Forum agenda, and I'm prepared to tell you what we recommended. I have not seen whether we've got the speakers yet committed to do it, but with Carol's suggestion, we hope to get the CEO of Duke Health System, or what?
He's the president of Duke University Hospital.
Okay, president.
He's unavailable.
He's unavailable. Oh, well, the request was we have a high-level speaker who has an appreciation for the changing healthcare system that's occurring. And so Dean Adams was charged with trying to find that person. And we also want Erin Fair, who is, and she's not available either? Well, you got feedback that I didn't get yet. Okay. So I don't know what we're going to do, Bill, and I can't give you an update in terms of what the speakers are. You were on the conference call with me, so you sort of know. We want the committee wants to try to figure out what's the role that the Leaders Forum needs to play in North Carolina pharmacy. And so they have developed a vision, mission statement that they want to have endorsed. And then they want to use some small group interactions to try to identify the issues that we need to deal with. And they want to couch that within a framework of, here's the major change that are occurring in healthcare, and here's the changes that are occurring in the workforce arena that is providing healthcare. And that relates to the issue of where does pharmacists fit into the primary care delivery mission? Do we have a role to play in that arena? If so, what rules might need to change, what legislation might need to be promoted in order to allow that to happen? Because the underlying problem is that there seems to be a shortage of primary care health workers. And we've seen a growth in PA programs now across the country and including in North Carolina. Probably very good, but where does pharmacists fit into that kind of arena? What role might they play if they were given an expanded opportunity, provider status, if we look at what's going on nationally? So those are the kinds of things we hope to address and lay out then some direction of what the board might need to do, if anything, what the association might need to do, what schools of pharmacy might need to do, which are sort of the three umbrella groups that make up the Leader Forum participation. I don't know, does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
And I appreciate your wisdom, your leadership, and you coming to the board and filling us in.
I hope I can be around for a couple more of these.
I mean, and that actually gives me a good, the question about the Pharmacy Leaders Forum gives me a good opportunity to remind. I sent out an email to remind you, we do have a June 1st deadline for NCAP and the schools to provide their invitees. UNC and High Point have provided their invitees. I'm quite sure since Michael Adams is spearheading the planning thing, we'll have his too. And I'll check back with Wingate as I need to, but Fred, we need.
Yeah, and we're doing it. Our problem is we have 18 members of our board of directors and we have 15 slots. So we're trying to see who might not be able to come, and that's why we haven't gotten back to you yet. And we've also have a number of school people who are on our board as well. And most of them have asked NCAP to be the place they come, not from their school. And so we're trying to figure out where we're going, who will be our 15 people, but we are.
And a reminder to the board members too, and Robert, I'd be happy to talk with you more about this too, that under our guidance policy, each board member can suggest to the board president, Mr. Mixon, up to 5 potential invitees, and then Bill, it will be your responsibility to winnow that down if necessary to the board's 15 invitees. So I'll send out more pestering reminders about that.
One more role for presidency.
That's right. All the glory that comes with it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fred.
Blanda?
Yeah.
You-
Just briefly, if you didn't get an opportunity last month to meet our new clinical case manager, this is Jennifer Niles. She started with us a month ago.
Hi, Jennifer, again.
I look forward to working with you all, with Mr. Campbell and Ms. Nelson.
You don't have to call me Mr. Campbell. I call me Jay. Most people call me far more profane things, which I'm.
Are you a new staff member, I mean, an additional staff member, or are you replacing?
Replacing Cindy Clark.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, the only items remaining on the agenda for today are the consent agenda, and we do have one brief litigation-related matter for closed session.
Okay.
Not bad.
I make a motion to accept the consent agenda, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved.
So that leaves, again, just we do have a need for a brief closed session, and
Thank you
I smell
all.
food, so it
Yes.
must be
Um,
out there.
Everyone here is more than welcome to stay for lunch. It'll be probably noon before it's ready, maybe a little earlier, but please feel free to stick around. And motion for closed session?
Motion to close.